I'm Rebecca Mitchell, 28 years old and 3 years in to handling the aftermath of the hardest decision I've ever made. After graduating law school at 25, I inherited my grandparents' $2 million estate when they passed within months of each other. With my financially irresponsible parents expecting access to this windfall, I transferred everything into an irrevocable trust. The family explosion that followed tested every relationship I had. My parents never spoke to me for 6 months afterward. Before I share how this changed everything, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below, and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to make a difficult family decision that others didn't understand. Growing up in the Mitchell family meant living with a constant undercurrent of financial anxiety. Our middle-class facade concealed a reality of mounting credit card debt overdue notices and hushed arguments about money that carried through the thin walls of our suburban home. My parents, David and Cynthia, were masters at projecting success while teetering perpetually on the edge of financial collapse. Dad worked as a sales manager at a local car dealership, bringing home an inconsistent income dependent on commissions. Mom picked up seasonal retail jobs but prioritized maintaining our family's appearance of prosperity. They drove cars they couldn't afford, hosted lavish parties on credit cards, and sent me to dance classes and summer camps, despite past due utility bills piling up on the kitchen counter. By contrast, my grandparents' home felt like stepping into another world. Harold and Eleanor Mitchell lived in a beautiful colonial house they'd purchased in the 1962 and paid off decades ago. Grandpa had built a successful small law practice, and Grandma had taught mathematics at the local high school for 30 years. Their home wasn't extravagant, but it exuded stability. The furniture well-maintained rather than replaced. With each passing trend, the garden meticulously tended by Grandma's patient hands, the bookshelves filled with classics instead of decorative objects purchased to impress visitors. I spent every weekend possible at their house growing up. While my parents interpreted this as me being spoiled by my grandparents, the truth was that I craved the peaceful predictability of their home. No one argued about money there. No one answered the phone with a practiced cheerfulness that collapsed into tension after realizing it was another creditor calling. "A dollar saved is a dollar earned," Grandpa would tell me while helping me deposit birthday money into my savings account. Money doesn't bring happiness, Becky, but financial responsibility brings peace of mind. The contrast between my two worlds became more apparent as I got older. When I was 16, my parents faced possible foreclosure after falling 4 months behind on the mortgage. I discovered this only because I overheard my father on the phone with Grandpa, his voice uncharacteristically humble as he asked to borrow $15,000. It wasn't the first time they'd been rescued by my grandparents, nor would it be the last. "Your parents have champagne taste on a beer budget," Grandma once told me. When I was in high school, her usually diplomatic nature momentarily giving way to frustration. They need to learn to live within their means. My academic success became a source of pride for my grandparents. When I expressed interest in law school inspired by Grandpa's career, he began sharing stories from his practice that he'd never told before. I'd sit in his wood-paneled home office surrounded by law books and the faint scent of pipe tobacco absorbing his wisdom about both legal principles and life lessons. "The law is about more than statutes and precedents," he'd say. "It's about doing what's right even when it's difficult." I worked hard through college, earning scholarships and graduating with honors. When I got my acceptance letter to law school, my grandparents were ecstatic. They insisted on paying my tuition, waving away my protests. "Consider it an investment in your future," Grandpa said firmly. "We've set aside money for this purpose." My parents, meanwhile, had already started hinting at their expectations for after my graduation. "Once you're making that lawyer money, you can help us upgrade to a bigger house," my father mentioned casually during a holiday dinner my second year of college. "And maybe pay off some of these credit cards," Mom added, with a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. By my final year of college, the dynamic had shifted subtly. My parents began treating my future success as a solution to their financial problems, while my grandparents continued emphasizing the importance of self-reliance and financial independence. During a private conversation over Christmas break before my final semester, Grandpa expressed his concerns more directly than ever before. "Your parents have never learned to stand on their own 2 feet financially," he told me, his voice heavy with the weight of decades of frustration. "Your grandmother and I worry they're counting on you to support them. That's not fair to you, Rebecca. You deserve to build your own life without that burden." I nodded, uncomfortable with the conversation but unable to deny the truth in his words. The seeds of distrust had been planted, and they would continue to grow as I observed my parents' reactions to my grandparents' declining health in the years to come. The call came during my second year of law school. I was buried in case studies at the library when my phone lit up with my father's number. I stepped outside to take it immediately, sensing something was wrong from his unusually somber tone. "Grandma's been diagnosed with Alzheimer's," he said without preamble. "Early stages, but the doctor says it will progress." The news hit me like a physical blow. Eleanor Mitchell, with her sharp mind and sharper wit, who had taught mathematics for 3 decades and could still recite complex formulas from memory, was facing a disease that would gradually steal everything that made her who she was. I drove home that weekend, finding Grandpa visibly aged by worry. At 78, his own health wasn't perfect. He managed high blood pressure and had undergone heart bypass surgery 5 years earlier. Yet he immediately stepped into the role of primary caretaker, his love for Grandma eclipsing any concern for himself. "We've had 60 wonderful years together," he told me, his voice cracking slightly. I promised for better or worse, and I meant it. As Grandma's condition deteriorated, I rearranged my class schedule to drive the 3 hours home every weekend. I helped with shopping, cleaning, and most importantly, giving Grandpa respite from the exhausting vigilance Alzheimer's demanded. We'd sit together in the evenings after Grandma went to bed, often in silence, sometimes reminiscing about better days. My parents visited infrequently, always with excuses about work commitments or social obligations. When they did come, they appeared uncomfortable with Grandma's changing behavior and would leave quickly. I noticed, however, that these rare visits often coincided with financial emergencies. "The transmission on the SUV is shot," Dad explained to Grandpa during one visit. "Looking at about $3, $200 to fix it. Terrible timing with all these hospital copays we've been helping with." The lie was transparent. My parents had contributed nothing to medical expenses, but Grandpa wrote the check anyway. I watched him afterward, shoulders slumped with something beyond physical exhaustion. 6 months after the diagnosis, Grandpa asked me to meet him at his attorney's office. Mr. Lawrence Bennett had been both his colleague and friend for over 40 years, a kind-faced man with silver hair and penetrating eyes that missed nothing. "I wanted to discuss my estate planning with you present," Grandpa explained as we settled into the leather chairs across from Mr. Bennett's desk. "In light of your grandmother's condition, it's important to make sure everything is in order." For the next hour, Grandpa and Mr. Bennett walked me through the willpower of attorney documents and healthcare directives. I listened in growing discomfort as Grandpa explained that he and Grandma had decided to leave their entire estate to me. "What about Mom and Dad?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Grandpa exchanged a glance with Mr. Bennett before responding. "Your parents have received significant financial support from us throughout their adult lives. We've kept careful records." He slid a folder across the table containing documentation of loans totaling over $300,000 over 20 years, none repaid. "We believe you'll use the inheritance responsibly." The knowledge sat heavy in my chest, a burden I hadn't asked for and wasn't sure I wanted. I understood my grandparents' reasoning, but I also recognized the family rift this decision would inevitably cause. As Grandma's Alzheimer's progressed, the difficult decision was made to move her to a specialized memory care facility. The day we took her there was perhaps the most heartbreaking of my life. She alternated between moments of clarity when she begged to go home and confusion when she didn't recognize any of us. Grandpa stood stoically beside her until she was settled, then broke down in the parking lot, his body shaking with silent sobs as I held him. The toll on Grandpa's health became increasingly evident. His hair turned completely white within months. He lost weight, his clothes hanging loosely on his frame. The heart condition worsened, requiring additional medication and more frequent doctor visits. Still, he visited Grandma every single day, sitting beside her bed for hours, even when she didn't know who he was. Meanwhile, I was struggling to balance law school, my part-time clerking position, and family responsibilities. My grades suffered, my sleep was minimal, and more than once professors pulled me aside to express concern about my exhaustion. One weekend, I arrived at Grandpa's house to find my parents' car in the driveway. Unusual, as they typically avoided the emotional difficulty of Grandma's decline. I let myself in quietly and overheard them in the kitchen. "Dad, you need to consider your own future," my mother was saying. her voice carrying the false concern I recognized from countless sales pitches. Have you updated your will since Mom's diagnosis? These facilities are expensive and you need to protect yourself. I stood frozen in the hallway listening as my father chimed in. We could help manage things if you'd like. Take some of the burden off your shoulders. Grandpa's response was quiet but firm. Everything is taken care of, Cynthia. Lawrence has all the paperwork in order. Later that night after my parents left, I found printouts of luxury car brochures in the recycling bin. They'd brought them with them, apparently already planning purchases with money that wasn't theirs. When Grandma passed away peacefully in her sleep 14 months after her diagnosis, the grief hit Grandpa like a physical blow. At the funeral, he appeared smaller, somehow diminished without his partner of 6 decades. My parents managed appropriate displays of sadness during the service but were discussing vacation plans in hushed tones at the reception afterward. 3 months later, Grandpa's heart finally gave out. I was with him when it happened, having taken a week off from classes to stay after he'd been hospitalized with chest pain. We were looking through old photo albums when he suddenly gripped my hand, his eyes finding mine with unexpected clarity. Remember what matters, Rebecca, he said, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. It's not the money. It's doing what's right. Those were his last words to me. He was gone an hour later, slipping away quietly while I sat beside him. The reading of the will took place in Mr. Bennett's office, 2 weeks after Grandpa's funeral. The wood-paneled room felt suffocating as I sat beside my parents, both dressed in meticulously selected outfits that projected respectful mourning while still displaying the designer labels they prioritized. Mr. Bennett's voice carried a gentle authority as he read through the legal formalities. Before reaching the key provision, I hereby bequeath all my property, both real and personal, and all my interest in property, wherever situated, to my granddaughter Rebecca Ann Mitchell. The silence that followed was deafening. I kept my eyes fixed on my hands, folded tightly in my lap, unable to look at my parents. The air seemed to crackle with tension as Mr. Bennett continued detailing the extent of the estate, the house valued at approximately $750,000 investment accounts, holding just over $1.2 million, and various personal possessions including Grandpa's cherished car collection. This can't be right, my father finally broke the silence, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. There must be some mistake. My parents wouldn't have left everything to Becky without providing for us. Mr. Bennett's expression remained impassive as he slid a document across the table. Harold anticipated you might feel this way, David. He asked me to provide you with this record of financial support already provided to you and Cynthia throughout your marriage. My mother snatched the paper before my father could reach it, her eyes widening as she scanned the detailed list of loans, gifts, and bailouts totaling over $300,000 across 25 years. This is ancient history, she dismissed, though her flushed cheeks betrayed her discomfort. Family helps family. They wouldn't have held this against us. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur of legal terminology and thinly veiled hostility. As soon as Mr. Bennett concluded the formal proceedings, my parents turned to me with expressions that I recognized from childhood. The calculated blend of affection and expectation they employed when they wanted something. Sweetheart, my mother began reaching for my hand. This is a lot of responsibility for someone your age. We should discuss how to manage everything together as a family. Your mother's right, my father added, his salesman smile not quite reaching his eyes. You're just starting your career. Let us help you with this burden. We have experience managing property and investments. The irony of this statement from a man who had remortgaged his own home 3 times to cover credit card debt was not lost on me, but I simply nodded noncommittally and asked for some time alone to process everything. Of course, take all the time you need, my mother said, squeezing my shoulder. Just remember, we're here to help. Maybe this weekend we can start looking at how to handle the house sale. After they left, I remained in Mr. Bennett's office, my emotions a turbulent mix of grief, guilt, and overwhelming responsibility. The elderly attorney watched me with compassionate eyes, waiting patiently as I gathered my thoughts. They'll go through it all within a year, I finally said, voicing my deepest fear. Everything Grandpa and Grandma worked for their entire lives, just gone. Mr. Bennett nodded slowly. Your grandfather shared the same concern. That's why we discussed several options for protecting the inheritance. What kind of options? A trust would be the most secure approach. It would allow you to control how the assets are used while providing protection from impulsive decisions. He didn't need to clarify whose impulsive decisions we were discussing. I left his office with information about various trust structures, my mind racing with possibilities and implications. Over the next week, my parents called constantly, each conversation circling back to helping me manage the inheritance. Their first proposal involved selling Grandpa's house immediately and using the proceeds to pay off their mortgage and purchase vacation property they could all enjoy as a family. Meanwhile, I discovered they had taken out a home equity loan just 3 months earlier, apparently confident they would soon have access to my grandparents' money. My father had also put deposits on both a boat and a luxury SUV vehicles that far exceeded what his income could support. "What happens if I say no?" I asked my best friend Sarah over coffee, my voice barely above a whisper. "What if I don't want to use the inheritance the way they expect?" Sarah, who had witnessed my family's financial dynamics for years, didn't sugarcoat her response. "They'll make your life hell, Becca. But the question is, can you live with yourself if you let them burn through everything your grandparents built?" That night, I couldn't sleep, my thoughts consumed by conflicting loyalties. On one hand, they were my parents, the people who had raised me and supported my education. On the other hand, I couldn't ignore years of witnessing their financial recklessness and the clear wishes of my grandparents. My boyfriend Jason found me at 3 a.m. sitting on our apartment balcony, staring at old family photos. "What would your grandparents want you to do?" he asked, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders. The answer came with unexpected clarity. They would want me to protect their legacy, to ensure their lifetime of hard work wasn't squandered in a matter of months. With that realization, my decision crystallized. The next day, I scheduled appointments with both Mr. Bennett and a financial advisor, specializing in estate planning. The path forward was becoming clear, though I knew it would be the most difficult road I'd ever walked. The following weeks became a crash course in trust law and estate management. I threw myself into research with the same intensity I'd applied to my law school studies, determined to honor my grandparents' wishes while finding a solution that might eventually preserve family relationships. After consulting with 3 different financial advisors and 2 estate planning specialists, I settled on an irrevocable trust structure that would protect the assets while allowing for responsible distributions. Ms. Bennett, who had anticipated this direction, had already prepared preliminary documentation based on conversations with my grandfather before his passing. "Your grandfather hoped you wouldn't need these," he explained, showing me the draft trust documents, but he wanted to provide the option if necessary. We spent hours in his office refining the terms. The trust would maintain the investment accounts, largely as they were, with professional management to ensure growth. The house would be sold with proceeds added to the principal. I would serve as trustee, with a secondary professional trustee from Mr. Bennett's firm providing oversight and continuity. Most importantly, we established specific provisions for how funds could be distributed. "I want to create an education fund for my cousins," I told Mr. Bennett, thinking of Ryan and Amanda, my Uncle Richard's children. Though we weren't particularly close, I knew my grandparents had always emphasized the importance of education. "That's a thoughtful provision," Mr. Bennett nodded, making notes. "What about your parents?" This was the most difficult question. Despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to cut them off entirely. A modest emergency fund, I decided after considerable thought. Something that can help with genuine medical emergencies or critical home repairs, but not discretionary spending. We added parameters requiring documentation for emergency distributions and capping the annual amount that could be accessed. The trust would also continue supporting several charitable causes my grandparents had contributed to throughout their lives, primarily educational scholarships and the local historical society. As the documents took shape, I felt a growing sense of purpose. This wasn't just about preventing my parents from spending the money irresponsibly. It was about creating something meaningful that would extend my grandparents' values and priorities into the future. The day I signed the final paperwork establishing the trust was surreal. My hand trembled slightly as I wrote my signature on multiple documents, legally binding decisions that I knew would fundamentally alter my family relationships. "Your grandparents would be proud," Mr. Bennett said quietly as I completed the last form. This took courage. That evening, I visited my grandparents' house alone. It would be listed for sale the following week, and I wanted one final opportunity to say goodbye to the place that had been my sanctuary throughout childhood. Walking through the empty rooms, memories surfaced with each step. Grandma teaching me to bake apple pie in the kitchen. Grandpa helping with homework at the dining room table. Holiday gatherings before money tensions had soured family relationships. In Grandpa's office, I found something unexpected. A handwritten letter addressed to me, tucked inside his favorite legal reference book. The paper crinkled beneath my fingers as I unfolded it, recognizing his distinctive penmanship. Dear Rebecca, if you're reading this, difficult decisions likely lie ahead. Remember that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the positive impact we have on others' lives. Your grandmother and I trust you to carry forward the values we've tried to instill. Whatever you decide, know that our love and pride in you are unconditional. Follow your conscience even when the path isn't easy. All our love, Grandpa and Grandma. Tears streamed down my face as I carefully folded the letter and placed it in my pocket. Their final gift wasn't the inheritance, but this affirmation that they trusted my judgment. It strengthened my resolve for the confrontation I knew was coming. Before leaving, I held a small private memorial ceremony in the garden Grandma had lovingly tended for decades. I placed fresh flowers beside the ornamental bird bath and sat quietly among her roses, saying a final goodbye to the property but carrying forward the legacy it represented. Tomorrow I would tell my parents. I invited my parents to dinner at my apartment, hoping the neutral territory might temper their reaction. Jason had offered to be present for moral support, but I decided this conversation needed to happen within the family. I spent hours preparing Grandma's lasagna recipe, seeking comfort in the familiar process while dreading the evening ahead. They arrived precisely on time, my father carrying a bottle of expensive champagne and my mother clutching her designer handbag like a shield. Their smiles were wide but didn't reach their eyes, an expression I recognized from countless sales functions and neighborhood gatherings where appearance mattered above all else. Something smells wonderful, Mom commented, air-kissing my cheek as she entered, just like Eleanor used to make. Dad placed the champagne on the counter with a flourish. Thought we should celebrate properly. Big decisions ahead. My stomach tightened at his words, knowing they had arrived with expectations entirely misaligned with reality. Still, I maintained my composure, serving dinner and engaging in superficial conversation about the weather and neighborhood developments. As we finished the main course, my father pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket and smoothed it on the table. We've put together a list of our outstanding debts, he announced, sliding it toward me. Nothing too major, just things we need to clear up before we can move forward with the vacation, property, and other investments we discussed. I glanced at the paper, noting the staggering total at the bottom exceeded $200,000. Credit cards, personal loans, a second mortgage, automobile financing, a comprehensive catalog of financial irresponsibility. Actually, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I wanted to discuss the estate management with you. That's exactly what we're doing, honey, my mother interjected with a practiced smile. Your father has some excellent investment ideas for growing the inheritance. I've already established a trust, I stated, simply, the words hanging in the air between us like an invisible barrier. The entire inheritance has been transferred into an irrevocable trust as of yesterday. The silence that followed was absolute. My parents stared at me with identical expressions of incomprehension, as though I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. What exactly does that mean? My father finally asked, his sales persona slipping to reveal genuine confusion. I explained the basic structure, how the trust would preserve the principal while allowing for controlled distributions, the education fund for Ryan and Amanda, the charitable commitments honoring my grandparents' priorities, and emergency provisions that would allow limited support in genuine crises. As understanding dawned, my parents' expressions transformed from confusion to disbelief to outrage. You had no right, my father hissed, his face flushing dark red. That money was meant for the family, not for you to control, like some power-hungry dictator. I'm trying to honor Grandpa and Grandma's wishes, I replied, fighting to keep my voice calm. They wanted the money used responsibly, not what. My mother interrupted, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. Not helping your own parents. Is that what they taught you? To turn your back on family? That's not what this is about. That lawyer manipulated you, my father cut in, pounding his fist on the table hard enough to make the dishes jump. Bennett never liked me. He's turned you against us for his own benefit. No one manipulated me. This was my decision. A decision to steal your inheritance from us, my mother shrieked. After everything we've done for you? The conversation deteriorated rapidly from there. My father called my Uncle Richard, putting him on speakerphone to create an audience for their outrage. Uncle Richard, who had always deferred to my father in family matters, joined the chorus of recrimination. "Your father needs that money for retirement," he argued. "Your grandparents would never have wanted you to hoard everything for yourself." I tried explaining the provisions I'd made for family support, the careful balance I'd attempted to strike, but no one was listening anymore. The narrative had been established. I was selfish, manipulated, ungrateful, cruel. "You're just like your grandfather," my mother spat, somehow transforming this intended insult into the highest compliment she could have given me. "Cold. Calculating. Thinking you're better than everyone else." When my father threatened legal action to break the trust, I calmly explained that the structure was legally sound and designed specifically to withstand such challenges. "We'll see about that," he snarled, grabbing his keys. "Come on, Cynthia. We're not staying another minute in this house of betrayal." My mother's parting words cut deeper than all the rest. "As far as I'm concerned, I don't have a daughter anymore. You're dead to this family, Rebecca." The door slammed behind them with such force that picture frames rattled on the walls. I sat motionless at the table, surrounded by the half-eaten meal I'd prepared, with such care the weight of their rejection pressing down like a physical force. Only when my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah did I realize I'd been sitting frozen for nearly an hour. "How did it go? Are you okay?" I wasn't okay. Far from it. The tears came, then great heaving sobs that seemed to rise from some bottomless well of grief and doubt. What if I had made a terrible mistake? What if they were right and I had betrayed my family for money? The questions circled relentlessly as I curled into a ball on my sofa, my phone buzzing with increasingly concerned messages from Sarah and Jason. Eventually, I called Sarah, who arrived within 20 minutes to find me still sobbing. "They hate me," was all I could manage between gasping breaths. "They don't hate you," she countered, wrapping me in a tight hug. "They hate that they can't control you or the money. There's a difference." As my tears subsided, my phone continued lighting up with notifications, dozens of text messages from my parents, alternating between guilt trips. "How could you do this to your own mother?" threats. "You'll be hearing from our lawyer," and attempts at manipulation. "Your father's blood pressure is dangerously high because of the stress you've caused." By morning, the campaign had expanded. Aunt Patricia was calling to express her disappointment in my greed. Cousins I barely spoke with sent accusatory messages. Even distant family acquaintances reached out, having heard some version of the story that positioned me as the villain who had stolen my parents' rightful inheritance. The isolation was absolute and overwhelming. In the space of 24 hours, I had gone from beloved granddaughter to family pariah, all for trying to honor the wishes of the two people who had loved me most unconditionally. The weeks following the confrontation blurred into a haze of anxiety and sleepless nights. My parents escalated their campaign beyond anything I had anticipated, seemingly intent on punishing me for my decision, regardless of the collateral damage to themselves or others. 3 days after our dinner, I received a certified letter from an attorney they had retained, threatening to contest the trust on grounds of undue influence and diminished capacity regarding my grandfather's final wishes. Mr. Bennett assured me these claims had no legal merit, but the emotional toll of being accused of manipulating my beloved grandfather during his grief was devastating. "They're hoping you'll cave under pressure," he explained gently. "Most family disputes like this are settled not because the legal argument is sound, but because the emotional cost becomes too high to bear." I was determined to stand firm, but my resolve was tested daily. My parents began showing up unannounced at my workplace, creating scenes in the lobby of the law firm where I had recently started as a junior associate. My embarrassment turned to genuine concern for my professional future when my supervising partner called me into his office. "Rebecca," he began uncomfortably, "we value your work, but these personal disruptions are becoming problematic. Clients have witnessed your father's outbursts twice this week." I nodded, mortified. "I understand. I'm trying to resolve the situation." "See that you do," he replied, his tone making it clear this was both advice and warning. The pressure extended to my personal relationships. Jason, who had been supportive initially, began showing signs of strain. What had seemed like a theoretical family dispute from a distance was now an omnipresent stress affecting every aspect of our lives. "Maybe you could compromise," he suggested one evening, after my parents had called our apartment phone 12 times in succession. Give them something to make this stop. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. That's exactly what they're counting on, I tried to explain. Any compromise now just rewards their behavior and starts us down a slippery slope. Is your principal worth losing everything else? He countered, gesturing around our apartment, which I took to mean our relationship, my job, my peace of mind, all the things currently under threat. The question lingered between us, creating a distance that widened daily. 2 weeks later, Jason moved out, explaining he hadn't signed up for this level of drama and suggesting we take a break until the situation stabilized. The breakup hit me harder than I could have imagined. In the midst of family warfare, Jason had been my safe harbor, the person who held me when nightmares jolted me awake at 3 a.m. Without him, the apartment felt cavernous and unwelcoming. My parents, sensing weakness, intensified their efforts. They somehow obtained my friend Sarah's number and called her repeatedly, spinning elaborate tales about my alleged ingratitude and psychological issues. Your mother told me you've had money obsession problems since childhood, Sarah reported, after one such call, her tone making it clear she found the claim ridiculous. She suggested I should encourage you to seek psychiatric help to break the spell that your grandparents and their lawyer put you under. Most of my other friends weren't as loyal as Sarah. The persistent drama and constant demands to take sides led many to quietly distance themselves. Invitations decreased, calls went unreturned, and social media became a minefield of passive-aggressive comments from extended family members. The isolation fed a growing depression. I began questioning everything: my decision, my values, my understanding of my grandparents' wishes. Maybe I had misinterpreted their intent. Maybe the trust was a mistake born of grief and misplaced loyalty to the dead at the expense of the living. These doubts led me to therapy, a decision born of desperation rather than wisdom. Dr. Marlene Carter, a calm-voiced woman with penetrating eyes, became my lifeline during this period. Family money disputes reveal character, Rebecca, she observed during one session. They don't create it. This situation isn't causing your parents' behavior, it's exposing patterns that were always there. Meanwhile, the legal threats materialized into actual court filings. My parents' attorney, operating on contingency, in hopes of accessing the trust funds, filed a lawsuit claiming I had exerted undue influence over my cognitively compromised grandfather. The filing included affidavits from my parents, uncle, and several family acquaintances, all attesting to promises my grandfather had supposedly made about their inheritance. The day I received the court documents, I vomited from stress, then sat on my bathroom floor sobbing until Sarah came to pick me up. The thought of my family's disputes becoming public record, of testifying against my own parents, of dragging my grandparents' memory through adversarial proceedings. It was almost unbearable. I can't do this, I whispered to Mr. Bennett during our emergency meeting the following day. You can, he countered firmly. And more importantly, you should. Harold and Eleanor entrusted you with their legacy precisely because they knew you had the strength to withstand this pressure. He slid a file across the desk. Records my grandfather had meticulously maintained of every financial interaction with my parents over 30 years. Loans never repaid. Checks with gift written in the memo line that were accompanied by promissory notes my parents had signed but ignored. Credit card statements showing extravagant purchases made days after receiving emergency funds for supposed essential repairs. Most damning were transcripts of recorded conversations my grandfather had prudently documented during his final years. In these discussions, my parents openly acknowledged the financial support they had received while making thinly veiled references to their expectations of the inheritance. Your father specifically asked about the will during one of these conversations, Mr. Bennett noted, pointing to a highlighted section. Harold deflected, but your father persisted, mentioning plans for spending when the time comes. As I reviewed the evidence, a disturbing pattern emerged beyond simple financial irresponsibility. My parents had systematically exploited my grandparents' generosity while planning for their deaths with calculated precision. There were references to gambling debts I hadn't known about, credit cards opened in my grandmother's name during her cognitive decline, and attempts to pressure my grandfather into changing account designations during his final months. If this goes to court, all of this becomes public record, Mr. Bennett warned. Your parents might want to reconsider whether that's in their best interest. The revelation was both heartbreaking and clarifying. Any lingering doubt about my decision evaporated, replaced by a cold certainty that I was protecting my grandparents' legacy from exactly the fate they had feared. Had I given my parents access to the inheritance, it would have vanished within months, leaving nothing but more debt and dysfunction in its wake. Armed with this knowledge, I authorized Mr. Bennett to prepare our full legal response, including counterclaims if necessary. The path ahead remained difficult, but for the first time since my grandfather's death, I felt the strength of conviction rather than the weight of doubt. The court date for my parents' lawsuit was set for June 15th, almost exactly 1 year after my grandfather's passing. As the day approached, I alternated between steely resolve and nauseating anxiety. Mr. Bennett had prepared an exhaustive defense, but the prospect of publicly confronting my family filled me with dread. The night before the scheduled hearing, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Expecting another distant relative calling to berate me, I almost didn't answer. When I finally did, I was shocked to hear my Uncle Richard's voice. "Rebecca, don't hang up, please." His tone lacked the hostility I'd come to expect from family communications. Instead, he sounded tired and something else I couldn't quite identify. Perhaps regretful. "I'm not calling to argue," he continued when I remained silent. "I've seen the evidence your lawyer submitted to the court, the financial records, the recordings. I had no idea about most of it." I sat on the edge of my bed, cautiously allowing a fragment of hope to form. Most people don't. They've always been careful about who knows what. I believed them when they said your grandparents had promised them the estate, he admitted. David can be convincing when he wants something. The understatement almost made me laugh despite everything. My father could sell sand in the desert when motivated by self-interest. "Why are you calling Uncle Richard?" I asked, directly too emotionally exhausted for pleasantries. "I've withdrawn my affidavit from the case," he said. "And I've spoken to your parents. I told them they should drop the lawsuit before all of this becomes public record." A wave of relief washed over me, so powerful I had to grip the bedpost for support. "Do you think they'll listen?" "Yes. They don't have a choice now. Their lawyer reviewed the evidence and advised them they'll lose. David is angry, but Cynthia understands it's over." True to Uncle Richard's prediction, I received a call from Mr. Bennett early the next morning. My parents had withdrawn their lawsuit hours before the hearing. The immediate legal threat was over, though Mr. Bennett cautioned that bridges remained thoroughly burned. "Don't expect reconciliation immediately," he advised. "This type of defeat often breeds resentment before acceptance." He was right. 6 months passed without a word from either of my parents. I sold my grandparents' house to a young family who appreciated its character and history. The proceeds went into the trust as planned, and I established the scholarship fund at my grandfather's alma mater in both my grandparents' names. During this period, I focused on healing and rebuilding. Therapy with Dr. Carter continued weekly, helping me process the grief of losing not only my grandparents but essentially my entire family in the aftermath. I purchased a modest townhouse closer to my firm, finding comfort in creating a space that was entirely my own. Sarah remained steadfastly loyal, and I gradually rebuilt connections with friends who had distanced themselves during the height of the drama. I volunteered teaching financial literacy at a community center, finding purpose in helping others develop the skills my grandparents had tried to instill in my parents without success. In one of life's unexpected twists, I met Michael at this volunteer program. A financial advisor with a similar passion for education, he approached relationships with the straightforward honesty I had come to value above all else after my experiences. Our connection developed, slowly built on mutual respect and shared values, rather than the desperate attachment that had characterized my relationship with Jason. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, 10 months after the withdrawn lawsuit, an email appeared in my inbox with my mother's address. The subject line read simply, "Coffee." My finger hovered over the delete button before curiosity won out. The message inside was brief. "Rebecca, I understand if you don't want to see me, but I'd like to talk. Just coffee. No demands, no accusations. Your choice of place and time. Mom." After discussing it with Dr. Carter and considering for several days, I agreed to meet at a neutral coffee shop halfway between our homes. I arrived early, selecting a table with clear sightlines to the exits. A habit developed during the months of confrontation. My mother entered exactly on time, looking smaller somehow than I remembered. The designer handbag was gone, replaced by a simple leather tote. She spotted me immediately, but approached cautiously as though expecting rejection even at this late stage. "Thank you for coming," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either," I admitted. The conversation that followed was unlike any we'd ever had. For perhaps the first time in my life, my mother spoke without performing. No careful image management, no calculated manipulations. She explained that my father had initially wanted to continue fighting through appeals and alternative legal strategies, but their marriage had begun unraveling under the financial pressure. "We've started counseling," she said, stirring her coffee absently. "Financial counseling first, then marriage counseling, when we realized how much damage had been done. Your father didn't want me to contact you, but I couldn't live with this divide anymore." I listened skeptically, having heard countless versions of "we've changed throughout my childhood," usually preceding another request for money. "I'm not asking for anything," she added correctly, reading my expression. "I just want a chance to understand what happened and maybe someday to rebuild some kind of relationship." When my father emailed a week later with a similarly tentative request to meet, I suggested a session with my therapist present. To my surprise, he agreed. The meeting was tense but productive, with Dr. Carter skillfully guiding the conversation away from accusations toward understanding. "I still believe we deserved some of that inheritance," he admitted toward the end. "But I can acknowledge we would have spent it unwisely. The evidence your lawyer had. It doesn't paint a picture I'm proud of." This partial acknowledgement was as close to an apology as my father could manage, but it represented progress nonetheless. We agreed to continue family sessions monthly with strict boundaries against discussing money or the trust, except in the therapeutic setting. The rebuilding process was painfully slow and frequently tested my resolve. My parents attended 6 months of financial counseling as a prerequisite for any discussion of potential trust distributions in the future. Uncle Richard reached out to mend our relationship, becoming an unexpected ally in maintaining healthy family boundaries. That first Thanksgiving after reconciliation efforts began was perhaps the most awkward family gathering imaginable. Conversation remained superficial, with everyone carefully avoiding trigger topics. Yet beneath the discomfort lay a foundation of truth that had never existed in our family before. By the following spring, enough healing had occurred that I felt comfortable using trust funds to help my mother through an unexpected health crisis. Exactly the type of emergency provision I had designed the trust to address. The clear documentation requirements and involvement of the secondary trustee removed the emotional manipulation that had characterized previous financial interactions. "You're not doing this the way I would," my father commented after I explained the process. Then, surprising me completely, he added, "But your way is probably better. I would have spent it all by now." This small moment of self-awareness represented a breakthrough I had never thought possible. While our relationship would never be what I had once longed for, we had found a new equilibrium based on reality rather than fantasy. And perhaps that was its own form of progress. It's been 2 years since I transferred my grandparents' estate into a trust, and looking back, I can honestly say it was both the hardest and best decision I've ever made. The journey has transformed not just my family relationships, but my understanding of myself and what truly constitutes wealth. The trust has grown steadily under professional management, currently valued at nearly $2.4 million thanks to prudent investments and minimal distributions. More importantly, it has served exactly the purpose my grandparents and I intended, protecting their legacy while supporting family needs in a structured, responsible manner. My parents continue attending financial counseling, a requirement I've maintained for access to emergency distributions. Their progress has been uneven but genuine. Dad still struggles with impulse spending, but now maintains a budgeting app that has helped him reduce credit card debt significantly. Mom has embraced frugality with surprising enthusiasm, even starting a small online business selling vintage clothing she finds at estate sales. Our relationship has evolved into something I never expected. Not the unconditional parent-child bond I once craved, but a more honest adult relationship, built on clear boundaries and mutual respect. We speak weekly by phone and meet monthly for dinner with an understanding that certain topics remain off-limits outside therapeutic settings. The trust has allowed me to help them in ways that support growth rather than enabling dysfunction. When Dad needed dental surgery last year, the trust covered the medical expenses directly rather than providing cash that might have been diverted to other purposes. When Mom's car broke down beyond repair, we arranged financing for a reliable used vehicle rather than the luxury model she initially requested. These boundaries have actually strengthened our relationship by removing the financial manipulation that once defined it. For perhaps the first time, we're connecting as people rather than as sources or recipients of money. My professional life has stabilized as well. The firm where I work has recognized my dedication through a promotion to associate with partnership discussions potentially on the horizon. My background in trust law, born of personal necessity, has become a professional specialty that serves clients facing similar family dynamics. Sarah remains my closest friend, her loyalty during the darkest period, something I'll never forget. Michael and I have built a relationship based on shared values and mutual support, recently discussing the possibility of marriage with a clarity about financial expectations that my parents never managed in 40 years together. The scholarship fund established in my grandparents' names has helped 4 students attend college, each selected based on academic merit and financial need. I meet with each recipient annually, sharing stories about Harold and Eleanor that keep their memory alive. These meetings have become one of my greatest joys, watching young people benefit from my grandparents' generosity in ways that extend their values forward. Perhaps most surprisingly, my relationship with Uncle Richard has deepened into a genuine connection. His courage in facing the truth about my parents' behavior opened a door to reconciliation I had assumed permanently closed. He visits regularly, sharing stories about my grandparents' early years that help me understand the people who shaped me so profoundly. Looking back, I realized that the true inheritance my grandparents left wasn't the money or property. It was the example they set through their lives. The value of integrity, responsibility, and standing firmly for what's right, even when it's difficult. The trust merely protects the financial expression of those values. The real legacy lies in how those values continue to guide my decisions. I've learned that wealth isn't measured by account balances, but by the positive impact we have on others' lives. By establishing boundaries that encourage growth rather than dependence, I've helped my family develop resources more valuable than money: self-reliance, accountability, and honest communication. I've also discovered that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. Every step of this journey terrified me, from signing the trust documents to facing my parents' anger to tentatively rebuilding relationships from the ashes of conflict. Yet each difficult choice strengthened my conviction that doing what's right matters more than doing what's comfortable. The hardest lesson was perhaps the most valuable: that love sometimes requires saying no to protect those we care about from their own worst impulses. By refusing to enable my parents' financial self-destruction, I ultimately offered them something more valuable than cash: the opportunity to develop healthier patterns that have improved their lives in ways money never could. For those watching who might be facing similar family financial dilemmas, I encourage you to consider what true generosity looks like. Sometimes it means setting boundaries rather than writing checks. Sometimes it means weathering disapproval to uphold deeper values. And sometimes it means trusting your own judgment even when those around you question it. My grandparents' letter promised that their love and pride were unconditional regardless of my decisions. That gift of unconditional support gave me the strength to make difficult choices that ultimately benefited everyone, though the path was far from easy. I still visit my grandparents' graves monthly, bringing Eleanor's favorite yellow roses and updating them on the trust's activities as though they can hear me. In those quiet moments, I feel their presence and approval more clearly than ever. They entrusted me with their legacy because they believed in my ability to preserve not just their assets but their values. That faith continues to guide me through challenges and remind me of what truly matters. What about you? Have you ever had to make a difficult family financial decision that others didn't understand? Or found yourself caught between honoring someone's wishes and keeping peace in the family? Share your experiences in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if you found my story helpful, and subscribe for more content about navigating complex family dynamics. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most meaningful growth.